Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, and welcome to the second video in this collection of vids that I'm putting out for Halloween. If you haven't seen any of the others, I'm doing 4 videos, roughly one a week, throughout this October for what you could consider the most spooky month of the year. So if you're here early, stay tuned for more, and if you're here late, maybe check out the channel to see what else is there. Now with that all being said, let's get on with the video. So despite being a Gamecube kid, I never played Luigi's Mansion. Even the newer ones I just let pass me by for whatever reason, and it was actually the release of Luigi's Mansion 2 HD of all things that got me to finally bite the bullet and give the series a proper try. And so while I was getting the first game all fully set up in Dolphin, I was doing my whole routine of looking at 60 FPS or widescreen patches and also seeing if there was any good texture packs for the game. Spoiler, there isn't. There never is. And while I was doing all of that, YouTube decided to recommend me a video for something called Luigis Mansion Premium Deluxe, an overhaul mod designed to re-implement cut content as well as brand new stuff and several other tweaks to the game. And this intrigued me as a possible candidate for my Hidden Potential series, where I review fan-made mods, patches and remakes of games both bad and good in an attempt to either fix or enhance the experience while being mostly vanilla friendly. Which this video totally is, by the way, welcome to the show. But it also just really surprised me generally, as I didn't expect Luigi's Mansion of all things to be moddable to such an extent. And in fact, as I started digging deeper, I discovered there's actually a fairly substantial modding scene for the Green Ghostbuster, and I ended up tumbling further and further down the rabbit hole from there. So with that all said, here's a look at Luigi's Mansion Premium Deluxe, and a few other mods too. Now, the general criteria for Hidden Potential is that the mods I'm covering have to be relatively vanilla friendly, and Premium Deluxe is very much so. In fact, in many ways, it's more of a refinement mod than a total overhaul, and that's why we'll be taking a look at several other modded experiences that were also made by Portable Productions. But more on that later when we get to them. Now, the first immediate difference made with Premium Deluxe that you'll notice is the changes to the game's lighting and overall brightness, which you'll notice is much darker compared to the original, and darker still compared to the 3DS remake. This makes the light of your flashlight something that you not only have to use to stun ghosts, but something that you'll likely have to rely on to some degree to actually navigate around the mansion. It adds this thin layer to the gameplay, but more importantly, the much more stark, harsh contrast between brightly lit and pure darkness really helps sell the whole horror vibe. Like, yes, it's still a kid's game, it's more spooky than scary. I mean, we can't all be the hit animated movie Monster House after all. But leaning in on these vibes and really playing around with the game's dynamic lighting the way it does really does add to the game's experience. And this is all just extra to the intended benefit of trying to recreate the higher contrast look of a CRT television on a modern display. The other core change to the game that is the most notable is that Premium Deluxe reworks the game's enemy placement even on the first playthrough to match that of the European version of the game's New Game Plus Hidden Mansion mode. For those of you who don't know, Luigi's Mansion was kind of rushed out the door to meet the release of the Gamecube, and what that meant was America's release was quite a bit more polished than Japan's, and Europe's release had a bunch of extra little additions compared to the other two. And one of these is that it made the Hidden Mansion mode much more interesting than a simple glass cannon style difficulty. This version of the New Game Plus mode has the entire game world flipped a la Ocarina of Time Master Quest and Twilight Princess on Wii, but it also remixes the enemy placements throughout the entire game, having more ghosts show up in each room and having harder ghosts show up much earlier than when they were originally introduced, as well as a few other additional changes to stuff like boss fights that are made to throw you off and make them just a little bit harder. It's basically like a Son of Sparta mode from Devil May Cry. And it's this enemy remix which has made its way onto Premium Deluxe and is present in all playthroughs, not just New Game Plus, and it's also not limited to a version of the game stuck at 50 FPS anymore. Granted, that is something that's easily fixed with emulation. And I appreciate this quite a bit, as even though I was a first-time player of the game, Luigi's Mansion, as I said before, is a kid's game, and much of the game's challenge comes from the adventure puzzle elements of the gameplay, and not so much for the complex layers of its combat? So the usual difficulty curve of the standard enemy layout is sadly just a little bit too gradual for my ascended pro gamer brain that vastly outmatches that of a child. Okay, I'll stop. Still, my point stands, and having to survive a much wider variety of ghosts throughout the earlier sections of the playthrough and throughout the whole game did mean that there were various points where I was actually sweating a little bit. I still only really died to boss fights when first trying to feel them out to see what I had to do, but the actual exploration of the mansion itself wasn't a cakewalk like I anticipated it to be, and I appreciated that. Now, outside of these two, a lot of the changes range from some pretty nice quality of life updates to some small cute additions to some really nice presentational flourishes that go a surprisingly long way to enhance the game in a bunch of small ways that really build up. Many of these come in the form of cut content that was still left on the disc or seen in trailers that were implemented back into the game. Stuff like a door in the top right of the foyer that's seen in an old E3 build that has been re-implemented, so whether or not you're just backtracking or aimlessly searching around for the next portrait ghost, the whole experience should be a lot more seamless. And some of the more generic assets in the final release have been replaced with assets that were left on the disc but were never used. Stuff like unique designs for the key in the door to the baby portrait ghost's boss room. There's also the ability to toggle the blackout on and off after it occurs, meaning that you don't have to scour the whole mansion in a single run to find every single secret during it. And if you want to make it easier to do so, there's a little secret in Egad's lab now too. You can now freely move around Egad's lab, which seems kind of pointless at first, but as you progress through the game, it will fill up with various different assets and objects that unlock after meeting various requirements that really spruce the place up and give you a lovely visual representation of your progress so far, which is just really nice for those dopamine receptors. What's more is you'll unlock both a toad that will take you to a small behind the scenes development room, as well as a boo who will let you toggle on or off night vision, which will make every single room appear at max brightness whether it's meant to be dark or otherwise. Now, there are a few more things on here, like being able to freely explore the mansion after you beat the game, and various other small additions that I'm sure went way over my head as a first time player, but that's about the most of it for Premium Deluxe. There is apparently an updated version of the mod that's going to add a lot more stuff to it in the works, so who knows, if you're watching this like a year after release, there could be an even better version available. Personally, something I'd really like to see in the update is for the coloured lighting effect that is used on the portrait ghosts to give some extra ambiance to their boss rooms to be added to things like lit candles and lanterns to a subtle degree. I'm not a Luigi's Mansion modder, so I don't know how feasible that would actually be, but I feel like the increased darkness effect would be really elevated by having just a little bit of a faint orange glow coming from these lights. As I said before, the stark contrast of having the game much darker than usual is a benefit to the game, but I do think having that extra layer of mood lighting would really help, especially if you just really kept it subtle. It would also just very lightly punish you for using the poltergust haphazardly, putting out various light sources that you could use, and would encourage you to actually light candles outside of puzzles. It wouldn't be game-changing by any means, but it would be adding just another thin layer to the gameplay that already exists. Not to mention just really enhancing the mood and the aesthetic and whatnot. Again, not sure if this is possible, but I do think it would be a really great visual flair. So if I left it at that, this video would be a little bit short for my liking, so I wanted to talk about the other mods that Lilith and Portable Productions have also made. But I will say it's not just these mods that exist, there's a whole plethora of them out there made by various different people. The reason why I'm covering these ones exclusively is because there's just too much for one video, and since these are all from the same pedigree, I figured it was fitting to talk about them all together. But if you are a big fan of Luigi's Mansion and you are interested in these mods, then I definitely recommend going digging, because there's some really interesting stuff here. Now first up, I personally really like the idea of seeing these other mods made by Portable Productions as being these extra little bonus modes that you'd unlock in a full release of Luigi's Mansion from a alternate timeline where it had more stuff in it from the get-go. The first mod that I'm going to be talking about is probably the most simple mod of the bunch, but it's one that really changes up the dynamic of the game quite a bit, and one that I imagine will be both interesting to series vets as well as speedrunners of the original Luigi's Mansion, and this is the Open World mod. Essentially, all it does is removes all of the keys from the game and has every door unlocked from the start. creating a much more open mansion to explore that lets you tackle the portrait ghosts in any order you'd like. And while this is a separate download that you'd need to patch onto a new fresh ISO of the original game, I do like to see it as this sort of post-game mode, like the Resident Evil 2 N64 randomizer. Another mod that sits on the complete opposite side of the spectrum with tons of extra custom work that's been put into assets and various other things is the Beta Restoration Plus mod, which aims to faithfully recreate everything we know about various pre-release versions of Luigi's Mansion based off small clips and screenshots that have been shared in magazines or on the internet over the years. Mechanics like a time limit and an overheating poltergust if you use it too much have been re-implemented back into the game, as well as stuff like a cut boss in the form of the chef ghost, amongst many different additions and tweaks such as extra doors being placed around the mansion and rooms having completely different layouts too. Honestly, if I was more of a Luigi's Mansion fanatic, I could probably make an entire video on this mod by itself, just by going into all the nitty-gritty aspects of it. And just like how I like viewing open world as being this sort of post-game mode for the original game, I kind of like looking at this as a sort of Luigi's Mansion version of the Insomniac Museum in the Ratchet & Clank games. Being able to explore and experience early builds of a game within the game itself is a really cool idea, and I really like just seeing this as an expansion to the original base mod of Premium Deluxe. Finally, there is the amusingly named Luigi's Mansion Extra Tangy Revamped, a sort of creepypasta-inspired hard mode mod. Now, sadly, this one I haven't had the time to fully delve into, and I'm honestly a little bit burnt out on Luigi's Mansion after all of these various different versions that I've gone through. But essentially, this mod is a new mansion that you have to explore with incredibly difficult ghost placements in each room. Some new ghosts have some really brutal attacks that will absolutely destroy you if you get hit by them. And the entire thing is a hardcore run. You get no saves, no continues, nothing. If you die, you start at the beginning. This mod is just as impressive as the beta restoration mod as well, as it's got stuff like a brand new boss in the form of the cut ELH enemy that was on the disc but never used. There's an absolute ton of heart and soul that was put into all of these mods, and I'm sure all of the ones that I've not checked out and given a look as well have just as much, if not almost just as much, put into them too. Considering a few months ago I didn't even think you could mod Luigi's Mansion, I think it's just incredible how much of a scene there's secretly developed underneath the shadows, or maybe I'm just blind, but either way, I think they're all very much worth checking out, and I also think that Premium Deluxe is basically the definitive way to play the original game. And with that, it gets my stamp of approval.